Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This one is a double government employee event, and what you should know is if you get the attention of a government employee and make them angry, they will make your life a living hell. Sorry, this is a long one. The setup is that I was working for a local county government in the permitting department that handled drainage and floodplain enforcement back in 2021. I received a complaint from a homeowner, let's call him Mark, who lived next door to a house that was part of an incorporated village. Mark lived in an unincorporated portion of the county, hence the call to me as an agent of the county. I drove out to the site to investigate and discovered some interesting facts. The permitting agent for the village allowed the incorporated homeowner, we'll name him Carl, to fill his lot, affecting the drainage which caused Mark's lot to flood every time there was anything more than light rain. Mark indicated that there was some tension between him and Carl, and part of the issue was that Mark and his partner were a same-sex couple. This raised a red flag for me, but in trying to be impartial, I took the information and some photos for the file and indicated that I would contact the village to find a resolution. I wrote a letter and then called the village inspector, let's refer to him as Doug, to discuss. The conversation went something like this. Me: "Hello, Doug. I'm calling about a drainage issue between two properties on Maple Street." Doug: "Yeah, what about it?" Me: "Well, it seems the fill on one property is causing flooding on the neighboring lot. I was hoping we could work together to resolve this." Doug: "Listen, buddy. The village can do as it pleases, and you can't do anything to stop Carl from doing what he wants. It's all approved by the village." Me: "I understand, but there are county regulations we need to consider." Doug: "Look, those people are just making complaints to cause trouble. You know how they are." I was taken aback by his tone and implications. "I'm not sure what you mean by those people, Doug, but I'm going to need to investigate this further." At this point, the game was certainly on, because if there's one thing that grinds my gears, it's bullying. I went back out and spoke to Mark to let him know what I was up to, and also that I wasn't going to let this slide. I then started investigating the elevations on the two lots and what fill had been placed on Carl's lot. Carl came out and started getting belligerent about my presence and ongoing investigation. Carl: "Hey, what do you think you're doing on my property?" Me: "I'm conducting an investigation regarding the drainage issues between your lot and your neighbors." Carl: "You don't have jurisdiction here. This is village property. I'm calling the police." I patiently listened and then pulled out my two-way radio and requested that the home base dispatch both a village and a county police unit to the location. I then calmly explained to Carl, "Since there's a regulatory floodplain on your lot, I do in fact have jurisdiction, and I'll be exercising my right to determine the impact of your fill activities upon that floodplain." Both police units showed up, and I let them know what was going on. They were both appropriately agitated to have to waste their time and let Carl know that I was within my authority to proceed with the investigation. A little while later, while I was measuring things, Doug showed up. He started berating me about harassing the village resident, threatening to call my boss and file a complaint, and so forth. I invited him to do so, quoting which parts of the code he should indicate I was violating. I was using marking paint to show the limits of the floodplain for the photos for the file, and what do you know, Doug's shoe got painted when he tried to stop me. Obviously, he was even more angry, as was Carl, due to very bright orange paint in the grass in his yard. I pointed out I had done the same on the neighboring lots, but they just kept complaining. It was actually marking chalk that comes off pretty easily. Interestingly, I found two really wrong things on Carl's lot. 1, there was fill placed in the floodplain, and 2, a garden shed was built on the fill and partially within the floodplain. Both are big no-nos and are actually against federal law, so the course of action had two parts. 1, make Carl remove the fill and shed from the floodplain, and 2, let Mark place fill in his lot outside of the floodplain to counteract the fill remaining in Carl's lot outside of the floodplain. I also told Mark it would be a good idea to run a field tile on their side to drain the water that would inevitably pond up between the two lots when it rained. Predictably, Carl and Doug got super angry when I sent the letter out that there were violations that either had to be corrected, remove fill and shed, or apply for a revision of the floodplain with the Army Corps of Engineers. Good luck with that. This then led to a meeting at the county office with Carl, Doug, my supervisor, and myself. Quickly things went to 11, and there was yelling by Doug about abuse of power, etc. Doug: "This is outrageous. You're clearly targeting Carl." Me: "I'm simply enforcing the regulations that apply to everyone." Carl: "This is discrimination. You're only doing this because of who lives next door." At this point, the department head, Lisa, came into the conference room. Lisa: "Gentlemen, I've heard enough. Carl, Doug, you're both wrong, and you should leave peacefully and comply, or face the consequences, which include fines." The best part was that Carl had to apply for a permit, and guess who was the one to review and approve it? That's right, yours truly. Now, I was following the letter of the law, but you have to know that government workers are often underpaid and overworked. Strangely, the permit for Mark was almost immediately approved, while Carl had to have a very thorough review to ensure it was correct. You could make a case I was abusing my power, but I can assure you that the timing for their review was well within acceptable limits. Also, how could I be held to account that they misfiled 3 times before they finally got it right? Generally, if you behaved like a civil human and came to the office, we would help you get things done properly so the permit would go through the first time. But Carl decided he could do it all on his own, so it took him 3 tries. Had he come to the office, I would have given him the same service as others, but he decided to take the hard route, and therefore I didn't give a single inch when it came to the submission being perfectly correct. Ultimately, the situation was resolved, but it took a lot more effort than it should have. Moral of the story: don't be an entitled, discriminatory jerk. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd end up in a fight with my homeowners association over my service dog, but here we are. My name's Jake, and I've lived in Sunny Meadows for about 5 years now. It's a nice enough neighborhood, manicured lawns, cookie-cutter houses, and nosy neighbors. Pretty standard stuff. I'm an Army vet, did 2 tours in Afghanistan, came back with a decent pension, some scars you can't see, and a service dog named Max. He's a German Shepherd, smart as a whip and loyal to a fault. Max helps me deal with my PTSD and mobility issues from an old leg injury. He's not just a pet, he's my lifeline. Things were okay at first. The neighbors were friendly enough, though some gave Max side eyes when we went for walks. I figured they just weren't dog people. No big deal, right? Wrong. It all started when Karen Johnson got elected as the new homeowner association president. Karen was one of those people who treated the homeowner association rulebook like it was the Constitution, Bible, and her personal mission statement all rolled into one. She'd been gunning for the position for years, and now that she had it, she was determined to make her mark. About a week after Karen took office, I found a notice stuck to my front door. It was printed on obnoxiously bright yellow paper, the kind that screams, "Pay attention to me." In bold letters at the top, it read, "Violation Notice." I skimmed through the bureaucratic jargon, my blood pressure rising with each line. Apparently, I was in violation of Homeowner Association Rule 17.3D. No pets over 30 pounds allowed in residential units. The notice informed me that I had 30 days to rehome the animal or face daily fines of $100. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Max wasn't just some oversized pet. He was a registered service animal. There were laws protecting service animals, weren't there? I was pretty sure the homeowner association couldn't just decide to override federal law on a whim. I decided to try the reasonable approach first. I called the homeowner association office and asked to speak with Karen. After being on hold for what felt like an eternity, her nasally voice came through the line. "This is Karen Johnson, homeowner association president. How may I assist you?" I took a deep breath. "Hi Karen, this is Jake from 1242 Sycamore Lane. I received a violation notice about my dog, Max. There seems to be some misunderstanding. Max is a registered service animal, not a pet. He's protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act." There was a pause, and then Karen's voice came back, dripping with condescension. "Mr. Jake, was it? I'm well aware of your situation. However, the rules clearly state no animals over 30 pounds. Service animal or not, rules are rules. We can't start making exceptions, or soon everyone will want one." I felt my temper rising, but tried to keep my cool. "Karen, I don't think you understand. This isn't about making exceptions. Service animals are protected by federal law. You can't just decide not to follow federal law because of homeowner association rules." "Mr. Jake," Karen's voice was getting that edge that people use when they think they're talking to someone particularly dense. "I assure you I understand the situation perfectly. The homeowner association rules were agreed upon by all residents when they moved in. If you can't abide by them, perhaps Sunny Meadows isn't the right place for you." Before I could respond, she added, "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. You have 30 days to comply or the fines will begin. Have a nice day." And with that, she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, seething. Who did this woman think she was? I'd faced down insurgents in Afghanistan, and now I was being pushed around by some power-tripping homeowner association president? No way. This meant war. My first stop was the VA office. I explained the situation to my caseworker, Sarah, who was as outraged as I was. She helped me gather all the necessary documentation proving Max's status as a service animal and his necessity for my daily functioning. She also put me in touch with a lawyer who specialized in disability rights. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Rachel Torres, listened to my story with growing indignation. "This is a clear violation of the Fair Housing Act," she said. "Not to mention the Americans with Disabilities Act. We'll start by sending them a formal letter outlining their legal obligations. If they don't back down, we'll take it further." Over the next few weeks, it felt like I was preparing for battle again. Rachel sent the letter, which the homeowner association promptly ignored. Karen even had the audacity to send another violation notice, this time threatening to put a lien on my house if I didn't comply. That's when we decided to take it to the next level. Rachel filed a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and the Department of Justice. She also prepared a lawsuit against the homeowner association for discrimination. The day we served Karen and the homeowner association board with the lawsuit papers was one I'll never forget. I insisted on delivering them personally, with Rachel by my side. The look on Karen's face when she opened the door and saw us standing there, Max sitting calmly at my side, was priceless. "Karen Johnson?" Rachel asked. "All business." "I'm Rachel Torres, attorney at law. I'm here representing Mr. Jake Anderson in a discrimination lawsuit against you and the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association. Please accept these papers as formal notification of the suit." Karen's face went from shock to anger to fear in the span of seconds. She snatched the papers from Rachel's hand, her eyes darting over the first page. This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "You can't sue us for enforcing our rules." Rachel's voice was cool and professional. "Actually, Mrs. Johnson, we can and we are. Your rules are in direct violation of federal law. I suggest you consult with your attorney immediately." As we turned to leave, I couldn't resist adding, "Have a nice day, Karen," echoing her dismissive tone from our phone call. The lawsuit lit a fire under the homeowner association board. Suddenly, they were falling over themselves to accommodate me. The violation notices disappeared, and I started receiving overly polite emails asking about Max's well-being and if there was anything they could do to make our lives easier. But it was too late for niceties. Rachel advised me not to respond to any of their communications except through her. We were going to see this through to the end. The case never made it to court. Once the homeowner association's lawyers got involved, they knew they didn't have a leg to stand on. We settled out of court, with the homeowner association agreeing to pay a substantial sum for their discrimination, as well as covering all my legal fees. They also had to issue a formal apology and agree to fair housing training for all board members. The cherry on top? Karen was forced to resign as homeowner association president. Turns out, the other board members weren't too happy about being dragged into a discrimination lawsuit because of her stubbornness. The day after the settlement was finalized, I took Max for an extra long walk around the neighborhood. Neighbors who had been avoiding eye contact for weeks suddenly became very friendly, waving and smiling as we passed. I even saw Karen weeding her front garden. When she spotted us, she quickly ducked back into her house. As we rounded the corner back to our street, I saw a moving truck in front of Karen's house. Looked like she'd decided Sunny Meadows wasn't the right place for her after all. I knelt down and gave Max a good ear scratch. "Who's a good boy?" I said, and he responded with a happy bark. "That's right, you are, and don't let anyone tell you different." The whole ordeal was stressful, no doubt about it, but standing up to discrimination? That felt pretty damn good, and knowing that because of our fight, other people with service animals in our community and maybe even beyond would be treated fairly, that felt even better. So here's a tip for any overzealous homeowner association out there. Think twice before you mess with someone's service animal. You might just find yourself in a legal battle you can't win. And to my fellow service dog handlers, know your rights and don't be afraid to fight for them. Sometimes the biggest battles are fought right in your own backyard. The next one is a petty revenge story. So I had a friend who we will call Tom. Tom and I met through work back in the early 2010s. When Tom's mother passed away and several years later his brother also passed away. My husband and I attended both funerals to show support. I got laid off from our old company. Then Tom eventually got laid off as well. But by then I had found a new job in our industry and was able to get him a new job as well within 2 days of his layoff. A couple years back, I came out as non-binary to Tom and then to my workplace. I began using they/them pronouns and added them to my email signature on my director's suggestion. Tom acted supportive when I came out to him, but he also never switched to the new pronouns. I'm talking not just forgetting or slipping up and catching himself, but no apparent effort whatsoever. A couple months later, while I was off work for a bit, I went through a very painful estrangement from my parents. Tom had known for years things were very difficult with my parents, but that we still spent major holidays with them. This will be important later. I texted Tom the day this happened, but didn't receive any response, even an "I'm busy, but I will get in touch later" token reply. The following day when I went into work, I discovered Tom, who had been covering for me while I was out of office, had been referring to me with the wrong pronouns in emails to clients. I sent him a quick, "Hey, now that my pronouns are in my email signature, please use these when referring to me in the future." His only response was to shoot my exact wording back to me saying, "Hey, now that X holiday is over, please remove the verbiage from your signature about it." Only about halfway through the day, after he was done complaining to me about work, did he make a token acknowledgement of the text I had sent him about my estrangement the day prior. I talked to him a little about it and how painful it was. After that conversation, though, he never brought it up again. The first major holiday since my estrangement was Thanksgiving. Just a couple months later, Tom didn't so much as ask what we were doing any time that week, let alone how we were doing, or offer to hang out with us at all even during that week or weekend. That hurt quite a bit. Months went by, and he still didn't use my correct pronouns once, at work or outside of it, despite me telling him several times how much people misgendering me hurts. Eventually, I spilled the beans to my director at work about how hurt I was over this, only because I desperately needed someone at work to back me up and try to lead by example, since evidently my friend wasn't going to be any help there. I did make my director promise not to tell anyone I had said anything, least of all Tom or HR. The last thing I wanted was for Tom to get in trouble. I only wanted more backup than I was getting and for someone to be willing to correct any misgendering that happened in conversations. I didn't get that backup, but I had to try. Soon after, I decided to send Tom an email using my therapist's suggested wording to let Tom know that I needed him to at least start trying to catch himself when he uses the wrong pronouns and to start trying to correct himself. This was only after he'd had about 6 months to try to start using the correct pronouns for me. I had wanted to give him time to adjust. Tom never so much as acknowledged the email. After that point, he entirely stopped talking to me about anything other than work, and even that he would do only when unavoidable. Fast forward to the last month or two, our petty revenge. Our director has retired, and I am very friendly with the person who took her place. The new director calls me saying she needs to promote someone on the team to be her manager, and is torn between two people who really want this promotion. Tom, and another team member. I am not on the list, BC, I don't want the position. She asks for my input. I prefaced by telling her I was in no way objective. But she knew my history with Tom, and I'm sure she did not expect me to be fully objective because of that. After I let her know how much resentment and bitterness I still hold toward Tom for the way he treated me, plus that I have no faith Tom will respect how I've asked to be referred to, and his inability to handle conflict maturely, it doesn't look like Tom will be getting the promotion. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened many years ago when I was a field organizer, and I ended up with a manager who had explicitly said she didn't want to manage anybody. But a series of events meant I was her direct report. In our initial meeting, I went over everything I'd been doing up to that point, where to find my weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual reports, how to keep track of where I'd be, and how to give me feedback between our monthly check-ins. She was not used to working with field organizers and was shocked that I wasn't going to be in the office except for meetings and to turn in my reports. And it's fine to not know things, but then she went and said, "If you're not in the office where I can see you, how will I know you're working? You could be doing anything you want and I'd never know." Over and above what kinds of assumptions that makes about my character, whether or not someone looks like they're working is a terrible metric for measuring what work is actually getting done. But I kept that to myself. Rather innocently, I offered to have my task tracking app send her an email whenever I accomplished a task. She agreed. The thing about me is I am a fast worker. I always have been. It's been a bone of contention with people who I work with. I create backlogs. I make other people feel weird about how much they do in a day. I used to get upset about this and wish everybody was as fast as me. By this time in my career, though, I learned to keep it to myself and spend some portion of my day pacing myself with others, or to find jobs where my pace wasn't that strange. This job was the latter. We were doing underfunded community-driven work where the failure or success of a project sometimes meant that the people we served couldn't pay their rent or afford food, so I was blazingly fast. After 3 days of hundreds of emails a day notifying her the second I completed a task, my boss decided that she actually didn't need to know whether I was working or not. We actually became good friends after that because we realized we had a lot in common, and we teamed up against the other bosses who kept making crappy decisions and putting us in bad places because they knew we were both competent enough to solve their problems for them. Neither of us work there anymore. We've moved on to much better things, but we're still friends today. The next story is titled, "Let me tell you a story that happened to me a few years ago. I had just retired from the military after serving for over 20 years, and I was looking forward to a peaceful life in my new home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Little did I know that my homeowner association would soon come knocking on my door for a seemingly ridiculous reason. I had recently bought a new car, and my daughter gifted me with a few stickers to put on it, honoring my time in the military. I had one that read Semper Fi and 2 others that read Vietnam Vet and Proud Marine. I was proud of my service and wanted to display my pride on my car. I never thought that this would cause a problem with my homeowner association. One day I received a letter from the homeowner association, threatening to tow my car and fine me $50 a day if I didn't remove the stickers. According to them, the stickers were illegal and against neighborhood policy because they were advertisements. I was shocked and confused. I had no idea that my stickers could be considered advertisements, and I didn't understand how they could be illegal. I decided to reach out to the homeowner association board to try to understand their reasoning. I scheduled a meeting with them and went to their office to discuss the issue. They explained to me that the stickers were not allowed because they were against the neighborhood policy of keeping a uniform and aesthetic look to the community. They claimed that the stickers were advertisements for my military service and could set a precedent for others to put up non-uniform decorations. I was not convinced. I explained to them that the stickers were not advertisements but rather a display of my pride and gratitude for my service to my country. I also pointed out that other residents in the community had stickers on their cars, including political and sports-related ones. They didn't seem to care. I left the meeting feeling frustrated and angry. I couldn't believe that my homeowner association was targeting me for something as harmless as stickers on my car. I decided to reach out to some of my neighbors to see if they could help. They were just as outraged as I was and agreed to write letters to the board, stating that my stickers were not advertisements and should be allowed. Weeks went by, and I heard nothing from the homeowner association. I continued to display my stickers, hoping that they would come to their senses and realize that they were being unreasonable. But then, one day, I received another letter from the homeowner association. This one was more threatening than the first. They were going to tow my car and fine me for every day that I did not remove the stickers. I was scared and didn't know what to do. I couldn't afford to pay the fines, and I didn't want to lose my car. I decided to reach out to a lawyer to see if I had any legal options. The lawyer I spoke to was sympathetic to my situation and agreed to take on my case. We filed a lawsuit against the homeowner association, claiming that they were violating my freedom of speech and discriminating against me as a veteran. We also pointed out that the policy of keeping a uniform and aesthetic look to the community was vague and could be interpreted in many ways. The case went to court, and it was a long and stressful process. The homeowner association hired their own lawyers to defend their policies, and it seemed like they were determined to win. But we fought back, and after months of legal battles, we finally won the case. The judge ruled that the homeowner association was violating my freedom of speech and discriminating against me as a veteran. The judge also pointed out that the policy of keeping a uniform and aesthetic look to the community was vague and could not be used to restrict an individual's right to display their personal beliefs or values. I was elated. It felt like a huge victory, not just for me, but for veterans and freedom of speech everywhere. But the story didn't end there. After the court case, I received a lot of support from my community. People stopped by my house to thank me for my service and for standing up for my rights. Some even brought over cookies and other treats as a show of support. The homeowner association, meanwhile, was not happy with the outcome of the case. They had to pay for their own legal fees. And they were also required to pay for mine. They had to issue an apology letter to me stating that they had made a mistake and that my stickers were allowed under their policy. I received the letter in the mail, and while it was nice to have some sort of resolution, I couldn't help feeling like it was a hollow victory. The next one is a pro-revenge story. The background: back during the 1997 Asian financial crisis, Malaysia was hit pretty hard, especially the small independent banks. The Prime Minister at the time, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, passed a bill to save the banking economy by having all the larger corporate banks buy out the smaller independent banks. At the same time, he made the One Malaysia Home Loan policy. Under this, all larger banks that bought out the smaller independent banks must send an acknowledgement letter to the home loaners of their original banks, stating the home loan change, and must receive an acknowledgement from their new loaners, be it a signature, physical, or digital. The story: my dad never liked how banks can legally rob people. For people like him who work the daily grind, having to pay the bank what is essentially 2 houses worth in interest payments over 2 or 3 decades is just plain wrong in his eyes. He strives to one day screw a bank over like how they screw their customers. A contract, be it sheer dumb luck, or if God listened to his prayers and decided to grant him that opportunity, that was what he got. When my dad bought our family's first home, he got a loan from a small bank called DCB Bank. All was well until a few years later, the 1997 financial crisis hit. As the small banks were bought out by the larger banks, many home loaners received acknowledgement papers on their new home loan payment plan and policies by their new banks. My dad, for whatever reason, never received this. He only knew that his original bank was bought over by the RHB Bank Corporation, and that he is now, unofficially, their customer. My dad was frugal with his money, and God bless him, financially literate. He knew that if he made a full settlement against his principal loan, he could avoid paying 30 years' worth of interest installments. Sometime in 2007, he went to an RHB bank branch nearby to make a full settlement, and this is how it went down. RHB employer: I'm sorry, sir. Even if you made a full settlement, you would still need to continue making payments for the interest. Dad: what do you mean? I have a home loan contract under DCB that states I can make a full settlement without paying for additional interests. RHB employer: true, but since you've acknowledged and signed under RHB, Dad, I've never received the acknowledgement papers, I never signed any papers from your bank, and all I have here is the DCB bank contract. RHB employer: sir, under the One Malaysia Home Loan? Dad: you have to send acknowledgement letters about the loan transfer. Yes, I know. What I want now is for you, RHB Bank, to produce my signature of me acknowledging the new loan policy for RHB. As of now, my paper with DCB is still valid until you produce my signature. Cue 1 hour of the employer and her colleagues scrambling around their files and databases trying to find any acknowledgement from my dad about their loan contract. At this time, the manager of the bank had called my dad into his office to discuss this problem. It basically had gone from civil to a shouting match that can be heard in the neighboring food stalls. My dad couldn't remember most of what was said, but the end of it was what he could still clearly remember, and to his son, it was probably one hell of a badass convo ender. Manager: I'm sorry, Mr. Muhammad, but you still need to make the interest payments, regardless of whether you make a full settlement. Dad: all right, I understand. I'll just have to take this up to Bank Negara, National Bank of Malaysia. Let them help you find that signature of mine. My dad had the bank manager by the balls now. Rather than risking a potential $1 million lawsuit and possibly losing his job, he excused himself to make a few phone calls to upper management, which took about half an hour. After said phone calls were done, the manager approached my dad and agreed to the full settlement without the additional interest installments. To add salt to the wound, my dad requested that they have his housing grant ready within the week, to which they delivered. All in all, my dad managed to secure himself a house, the housing grant, and in the process, screwed RHB Bank of what is equal to $60,000 worth of interest payments, which to a middle-class Malaysian in 2007 is a retirement fund. The next one is a petty revenge story. I am a hairdresser who rents a booth in a salon, as do all the stylists who work there. The owner of the salon is one of my best friends, so after closing the salon I operated for 20 years, I joined her team, and I am really happy. I have a wonderful clientele with the exception of a few, which I'll get to in a bit, and get along great with my coworkers, except one, Kate. She has a grating personality, and for the most part, I can just let her comments roll off my back. She doesn't have a clientele, which leads to her having way too much free time, which she uses by pestering the rest of us while we are with our clients and butting into conversations that should be private. Recently, I had two of my clients tell me that when they called for appointments, they were told that I didn't have time for them, and that Kate would give them a discount if they came in with her instead. But they would have to come in on a day that I wasn't there so that my feelings wouldn't get hurt. Well, that's a load of nonsense because everyone in the salon knows that if I don't have an opening for someone when they call, they are to take down the name so I can call them personally to work them in. When I confronted Kate about those instances, she just shrugged and said that I was too sensitive, and besides, I was too busy, so she was really just helping me out. On to the petty revenge. I have a few customers that I have been trying to get rid of for years. You know the ones. They are never happy, always late, don't tip, and generally a pain in the butt. I decided that if she wanted my customers so bad, I would feed her the ones that I wanted to get rid of anyway. So when they had trouble getting in with me, I would tell them that I was booked out for months, but they would be really happy with Kate. She told me yesterday that she didn't know why all my difficult customers were her problem now. My days are better, it's a bit easier for my customers to book with me, and she is always in a bad mood for having to deal with unhappy customers so much of her day. Plus, a couple of my other coworkers have started doing the same. The next one is a petty revenge story. A little background info. My wife and I purchased our house a few years ago, and on the day we moved in, our neighbor Roger called the cops on us for moving in too loudly. We weren't playing music or even talking to each other, just my wife and I moving our belongings into our new house. The cops arrived and I explained that we were just moving in and they apologized for bothering us. Roger, in all of his retired proud boy glory, came out of his house immediately after they left to let us know that he was the one who called the cops and, in more words, said that he was setting the tone for our new life. Even still, we were super cordial with this guy because we wanted to make a good impression in our new neighborhood. It was our first home, and it was important to us to make it homey. About a year or so later, our first son was born. We let our property fall to the back burner while we adjusted to parenthood, and a few newspapers piled up in our driveway and, in the rain, sort of melted onto our driveway, all on our property. Roger came knocking on our door to complain. I told him I was sorry and that we let it get away from us. I explained that we have a newborn son and I would get to it ASAP. He dug in and started telling me how when he was a new father, he didn't let anything affect his property, and he told me I was being lazy. I said, then why don't you pick it up if you're so worried about it? To which he said, no, I want you to pick up the mess. I was trying to be semi-cordial still because I'm not interested in unnecessary conflict with my neighbor, so I told him fine, I would get to it, and he left. Later that year, Roger came over one day to ask if he could trim the tree that hangs over my fence onto his side of the fence, and I was fine with that, so I said no problem. He casually mentioned how one time when a 17-year-old kid, friends with his delinquent drug addict son at the time, broke into his garage. He hit him in the head with a baseball bat until he was retarded, and the police came, and he was cleared of all responsibility because it was a break-in. He was smiling and laughing while telling me this. Noted, I'm thinking to myself. This guy is a ducking piece of crap psychopath. Well, it's a couple of years later now with a few more minor run-ins, but nothing too significant, and my wife and I just had our second son 1 month ago. About 10 days ago, when my son wasn't even 3 weeks old, I got a notice on my door saying my lawn was in violation of my city's code. I mowed it 2 days before my son was born, so it's been about 3 weeks since I mowed. And it's been raining since. I had 48 hours to comply. I called the number on the card and there was no answer, so I called the non-emergency line to verify what my responsibility is because of the vague wording on the door hanger. It's because one of the types of grass in my lawn, growing very sparsely like 1 blade per square inch, is over 12 inches tall. The majority of the grass was like 2 to 3 inches long, but there was another type there as well that grew faster. I told them that I'm a new father and asked for an extension to deal with it later. They said not to worry about the lawn and just take care of the baby. So now, with some newfound confidence, I mowed my lawn in a spiral shape, leaving lots of grass remaining as a middle finger to whoever, we know who it was at this point in the story, right? Called the cops on me about my lawn. A couple of days later, Roger talked to me over our shared backyard fence and asked about my lawnmower and if it was busted or something. I told him, no, I just have more important priorities than mowing my lawn, and told him about my new son. Then I asked if he was the one who called the cops on me about it. He said he called code enforcement, but not on me. He called on my new neighbors on my other side, a really nice Mexican family who are always diligent about their lawn and always working outside on their new property. He said code enforcement must have happened to notice my lawn when they went to follow up on his call next door. At this point, I said something along the lines of, look, I'm a pretty cool guy. If you have a concern about my property, then you can speak with me directly. He swore up and down that he didn't call on me and that it was just a coincidence. Whatever. About a week after that yesterday, he knocked on my door and I already knew what was coming. I answered the door kind of chuckling and greeted him. He was kind of chuckling too at this point because it's ducking ridiculous. He said, hey, so you said I could talk with you if I had an issue with your property. I told him, yeah, by all means. He gestured to my lawn and asked what it's about. I said, it's kind of like a middle finger to whoever called code enforcement on me. He was irate. He said if it's a middle finger to him, he stopped him and reminded him that he told me he didn't call them on me, so he shouldn't feel targeted. He ignored me and restarted his sentence the same way again. So I cut him off again and said, I specifically am telling you it's not a middle finger to you, Roger. He said, if it's a middle finger to me, then this means war. Over what? I asked him, laughing. He was getting bigger and huffier by the second and told me I was a lazy piece of crap, and my property was in shambles, RLLL, and that all the other neighbors mow their lawn. I reminded him I have a newborn son, and that my lawn can suck my dick for now. He puffed up as big as he could and said, I never had this issue when I was a new father. I told him I don't give a crap about what he did as a dad. Ironically enough, his drug addict son lives in the house on the other side of him and causes trouble in the neighborhood regularly. Cars peeling out, people screaming at each other, drug addicts always waiting outside, etc. Now he tells me that he's going to call code enforcement on me every day, and I tell him to get the duck off my property. He says, move me. So I tell him I'm calling the cops, and he says, do it. So I grab my phone and start dialing. He walks to the sidewalk and keeps yelling at me about how I'm lazy and not fit to own my property. The cops come and speak with us. It's very anticlimactic. They did make sure to let him know that he needs to get off my property when I say so, and that's all I wanted from them. Tomorrow I'm going to take my hedge trimmers and mow my maize down to 11 inches. Duck you, Roger. The next one is an entitled people story. To start off, I, 27F, have lived with my gran, 77F, all my life. She raised my older brother and me, and for that I am eternally grateful. However, even though I love her, I have to admit that my gran has always been extremely entitled, controlling, and even manipulative, mostly regarding my life in particular. I still live at home and act as her caretaker, as well as helping out my autistic brother. And because someone has made the accusation before, no, that doesn't mean I'm just mooching off of her. I actually take care of her. I cook her meals, I clean up for her, I help her bathe, do her hair and get dressed. I help her get to the bathroom and clean up after. I help her sort out her meds. I run errands and do the shopping, as I'm the only one who can drive. I help her get to appointments. I push her wheelchair whenever she's in it, and I do anything and everything else she needs. I have been doing most of these things since I was still in high school. Yes, she pays for everything, but that's only because she hasn't allowed me to get a job in almost 8 years, always telling me things like, what if you were at work but I really needed you, among other things. And even when I had a job, she took all but a fraction of every paycheck to put towards bills, which I was fine with at the time because I felt like it was only fair to pay my share since I finally had an income. Every time I bring up looking for a job now, she has a million reasons to keep me from doing so. Most recently, though, she's taken to hating my boyfriend, 24M, of 6 years, for pretty much no real reason besides for dating me. She talks crap about him constantly, calling him useless and good for nothing, insulting him behind his back on an almost daily basis, even though he's bent over backwards to help me out in many situations. She makes comments like, he must not love you very much since he never comes around. But then she pitches a fit every time he asks me on a date. And the only time she ever wants him coming to our house are when she can exploit him, like roping him into moving furniture or cleaning out the garage. She makes backhanded remarks about how we've been together for 6 years but he's never proposed, but then raises hell if I spend more than a couple of hours with him on a date. She's even told me, I'd like for you to give me a great-grandchild sometime before I die. But she loses her mind if my boyfriend even so much as kisses me anywhere near her. My boyfriend is the sweetest, kindest, most hardworking guy I've ever known, and he treats me better than anyone in my life ever has. He even has a great job and makes a decent living, owns his own home and car, and is very good with his finances. But she still has to nitpick every little thing about him to try and turn me against him. She even talks crap about his family, mother and brother, even though they also treat me extremely well, and no matter how much I defend any of them, she won't stop. This kind of came to a head the other night. For context, we've just been informed by our landlord that, come June 2023, he's selling the house we're renting, so unless we can come up with $30,000 to buy it from him, we'll have to move. That's a whole different can of worms in and of itself. But what floored me was that a few nights ago, my gran went from insulting my boyfriend's hair, he's been growing it out, to, maybe we should move to state that's 2 states away so you can get away from him, in the same breath. And no, she wasn't joking. I've been with him for 6 years, but she wants me to move away from him because she hates him. Now, as far as us possibly having to move out in a year, she 100% assumes that I most definitely have to move with her and my brother to keep taking care of them, no exceptions. My boyfriend and I are already talking about sitting down with her to discuss my moving in with him instead, and I'm dreading that discussion because I know it won't go well. All she's done for years is dependent on me to the point that she actively refuses outside help because Bunny can just do it. She refuses to move to a retirement or assisted living home, and to make things worse, she's already decided that, after she's gone, I will be taking over full care of my brother. Without even considering what I want to do with my life, I just know she's going to go postal and lay on a massive guilt trip when I finally tell her I want to move out entirely. But I want to get on with my life. I'm tired of my gran thinking she's entitled to my life. I'm sorry I don't have a conclusion for this right now. I'll try to post an update when we finally talk to her. Any advice for that conversation is welcome. I'll need all the help I can get. The next story is titled, My Name is Emily, and I want to share with you the whole story of what happened when we clashed with our local homeowner association. It all started when my husband was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a condition that gradually deteriorated his mobility to the point where he required a wheelchair to get around. We knew that we needed to make significant changes to our home to accommodate his needs, which we did by installing ramps, widening doorways, and adding a lift to the stairs. However, we ran into a problem when it came to storing his wheelchair. Our garage was cluttered, and there was no room inside the house, so we decided to store it in the garage with the door open to let the air circulate. Little did we know that this decision would lead to a months-long battle with our homeowner association. It all started when we received a notice from the homeowner association demanding that we remove the wheelchair from our garage. The notice cited a rule that stated that garages could only be used for parking vehicles and storage, not for personal items. We were surprised by this demand, and we tried to explain our situation to the homeowner association. We told them about my husband's condition and how we needed to store the wheelchair in the garage. However, the homeowner association was unyielding. They told us that the rule was clear and that we needed to comply. They started fining us every day for violating their rules, and the fines quickly piled up. We felt like we were being bullied, and we knew we had to fight back. We hired a lawyer, and we decided to sue the homeowner association for discrimination against disabled people. Our lawyer helped us file a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which investigates claims of discrimination in housing. We also filed a lawsuit in state court, alleging that the homeowner association had violated the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. The legal battle was long and difficult. The homeowner association had a team of lawyers and experts who defended their position vigorously. They argued that the rule was necessary to maintain the aesthetic of the neighborhood and that it was not discriminatory. They also argued that we had not exhausted all the administrative remedies available to us before filing a lawsuit. However, our lawyer was able to show that the homeowner association's rule was discriminatory and that it violated the ADA. We presented evidence showing that the rule disproportionately affected disabled people like my husband, who needed to store medical equipment in their garages. We also showed that the homeowner association had not provided any reasonable accommodation for disabled people, despite our repeated requests. The judge agreed with our arguments and ruled in our favor. The judge ordered the homeowner association to pay us $300,000 in compensation and to drop all the charges against us. The judge also ordered the homeowner association to revise their rules to make them more disability-friendly and to provide reasonable accommodation for disabled people. However, the victory was bittersweet. We had to endure months of harassment, legal battles, and emotional stress. We also had to pay our lawyers' fees and court costs, which were significant. It was a difficult and expensive fight, but we knew that we had stood up for what was right. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Several years ago, my friend, whom we'll call Boris, and I would always help each other do the spring cleanup for our properties. This included taking out damaged trees, preparing garden plots, and taking care of our weed-infested yards. I was going to be first on the cleanup detail, so I prepared tools and implements the Friday before the big cleanup was to happen. I sharpened tools and chainsaw chains, the lawnmower blade, and got everything in order. Among those tasks was mixing 2 cycle oil. I finished up kind of late and generally put things away for the next day. The next morning, Boris showed up with coffee and biscuits around 8 a.m. As we were sitting on his tailgate enjoying breakfast, our neighbors rode by in their beat-to-hell Chevy Cavalier smoking like a freight train. We will call them Rocky and Bullwinkle. Boris and I made the usual jokes about the amount of smoke pouring from the exhaust. Damn, bet they go to the gas station and fill up with oil and check the gas. We soon finished breakfast and thought no more about it. As we began to get the tools laid out and hash out a plan of attack, I could not find my gas cans. No mixed gas, regular gas, or a gas can in general. That's when it dawned on us why the car Rocky and Bullwinkle were driving was smoking so bad. I'm pissed, to say the least. Well, all Boris and I could do was go shopping for gas cans, gas, and more 2-cycle oil. After we returned, we saw Rocky and Bullwinkle pass by several times, but all in all, we got a lot done. The next weekend, we dedicated to clean up at Boris's. A weekend or two went by, and we had a family dinner at my wife's grandparents', who are Rocky and Bullwinkle's grandparents as well. Toward the latter part of the evening, we were having a few drinks. Most people had left, and my wife's grandfather and I were shooting the breeze when I had to take a leak. As I was doing so, I saw a gas can with very distinct paint on it. I inquired from the old man about how it came into his possession, and he stated Rocky and Bullwinkle left it there. I simply explained it was mine, as was another, and loaded them in my truck. It ate at me every time that POS car with my post neighbors went by. So I hatched a plan from a rotten egg. I went and bought a few gallons of gas, a few gallons of diesel fuel, and some other various oils. I made a concoction of these different chemicals, and filled my new 6-gallon gas can I had to purchase. With some clean gas, I filled the lawnmower and cut some grass that evening, making sure Rocky and Bullwinkle saw me. Then I put everything away, but forgot and left that rotten egg gas can out. I got up and went to work the next morning and didn't even think to check on the can. But when I got home, I checked, and it was gone. My wife informed me that my plan must have worked as she watched Rocky and Bullwinkle go in and out with the car, not only smoking but spitting and sputtering as well. The last time they rode out, they didn't ride back in. They gave me about an hour of peace before they came over and wanted to know if I could look at the car and see what was wrong. If it could not be fixed on the side of the road, maybe tow it home. My response? I've had a long day and have a migraine. Maybe tomorrow. I saw the panic set in when I told them that. That's when they told me they had no insurance and it was on a main road. Tough luck, so the highway patrol did run across it and had it towed. It was going to cost them around $500 to get it out of impound, plus they had to have current registration and insurance. The car wasn't worth it. Well, they're those types of people that good luck just falls on, and the pastor for a local church gave them an old Ford Taurus. It took me a few cans of rotten egg gas, but I got the motor to lock up after about a month. This time it quit in their grandparents' yard. So they scrapped it, and as luck would have it, they got their income tax returns. They bought a nice-looking Ford F-150, but it began having problems too. It smoked really bad. They did take it to a mechanic that eventually found the problem. He got the truck running right again for about $1,500, and I have never had any more gas come up missing. The next one is a petty revenge story. As Christmas time approached, I still felt bitter towards my nephew. My mom had lived with me for a few years while she was getting back on her feet. She didn't have much money, but she always helped out her kids if they needed it, even if she really shouldn't have. One of my nephews, who was around 10 years old at the time, asked to borrow my Nintendo Switch so he could play Fortnite. I said yes because I never played it. After a while, he asked my mom, his grandma, for $10 for the battle pass. She said yes and stupidly put her credit card information in his account for it. At some point in the future, another $10 or so was charged to it. On accident, according to the nephew. Oh well, it wasn't a big deal, so she let it go. Maybe it's due to my lack of experience, but I find the whole account thing between Nintendo Switch, Epic Games, and Fortnite to be confusing. I tried over and over to delete her card info out of the accounts, but he would always manage to get it back somehow. I don't think he could have written her info down. My brother had to drive 45 minutes to bring me the Switch to delete the info. Over the next year or two, he charged something like $300 to the credit card outside of the times she gave him permission. Somehow it was always a mistake, and he would immediately text and apologize. Eventually, he asked us not to tell his parents. My mom wouldn't do anything about it other than tell him to stop. I tried to stay out of it because it was between them. However, I got fed up after a certain point. I texted my brother to bring me back my Switch, and I was keeping it. I told him about all of the charges. My brother has always used my mom for money, including stealing from her. So he acted concerned, but in reality, he couldn't or wouldn't pay her back. He brought the Switch back to me. My nephew kept asking to have it back and was apologizing, but the answer was no. That wasn't enough for me. My mom wasn't going to force them to pay back the money, but I couldn't keep myself out of it any longer. I decided that my nephew wouldn't be getting the $25, $50 gifts he normally gets for Christmas and birthdays. He could pay back his debt over the next 3, 6 years, and I'd make sure my mom got the money back since we have some linked bank accounts. It's been 2 years now without any gifts from me. He may not even notice, but I do, and I feel good about it. She still buys him gifts, of course, but she's being repaid one way or another. The next one is an entitled People Story. In the year 2020, during the COVID lockdown, I was working at Tim Hortons almost every day. I worked in a small town, so most of the employees were older and chose to stay home due to the risks. That meant us younger staff picked up most of the shifts. No biggie, bigger paycheck. However, I ended up getting a temporary promotion to management with little to no training. I learned by trial and error, and when masks became mandatory, there was a bit of pushback. However, people needed their caffeine to feel semi-alive. During COVID, we experienced people spitting at us, throwing their garbage or whatever they could grab, upset because only 3 people were allowed to be on shift to allow social distancing, and they had to wait 15 minutes to get their drinks. It got to the point that the local RCMP would sit and give people tickets for being rude. Now, every day at 1:30, Ken would make his appearance. He'd waltz in, not wearing a mask, and every time he would be sent back out to get it to put it on. He'd usually just drive off and not order. However, Ken and his companion Karen came up with the idea of waiting for the officers to go on their lunch break, and then come into the store. Ken came waltzing in, no mask, and at the time, it was myself and a young girl who was in high school on the floor as it wasn't a busy day, and our co-worker, when I took his temperature at the door, had a fever and wasn't able to work. She told him that he needed his mask before we'd take his order. He said that it was fine, and he'd only take a few seconds. She refused and offered drive-through as he didn't have to wear one if he did that. Cue the meltdown. He started screaming that we were discriminating against him, that he had rights. At this point, I stepped in and sent the girl to drive-through, and I responded with, yes, you have the right now to wear a mask. However, we have the right to work in a safe environment. And if Alberta Health happened to come in and see I'm serving you with no mask, I would lose my job. If you choose not to wear a mask, that is in your right. But I'm going to have to ask you to use the drive-through. Well, cue the even larger meltdown. He proceeded to tell me I might as well be in Germany forcing Jewish people into train cars and sending them to death camps. At this point, I had been at work since 5 a.m. and frankly, I was done. I immediately began to speak the few phrases of German I know. The guy's mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. Finally, he was able to spit out a Nazi CNN. I said the few phrases again before asking if he'd like to get his mask so I can take his order. He demanded to speak to my manager, so I did a 360 and spread my arms out and happily said, "Hi, I'm OP, I'm the new manager. How can I help you today? Oh, I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, I can't take your order or deal with your complaint until you are wearing a mask. If you don't have one, I'd be happy to provide you with one." The guy absolutely lost it. I watched a 40-some-year-old man stomp his foot. As he's trying to come up with an insult, his wife walks in, upset that it's taking too long. Lo and behold, no mask. She begins the same speech of me being an awful human being, but I hold my hand up and say, "I'm sorry, ma'am, your husband here already gave me that lecture. May you try something else?" She then goes on and on about how they can't breathe with masks on, it's a medical condition, etc. I smile and say, "Well, your breathing seems fine since both you and your husband can scream at us for several minutes without needing to breathe. And if you refuse to wear masks, then I have to ask you to leave." Well, how dare I suggest that? They need their iced caps and bagels, and they aren't leaving until I give them, and it better be free for the inconvenience and disrespect they had to endure. I shrugged and walked away and started making orders for people in the drive-thru. Just as the lovely RCMP officers are walking in the door, Karen begins to throw whatever she can get her hands on at us. Thankfully missing, but destroyed a few of our monitors with napkin dispensers. The officers immediately grab both and drag them outside. She's screaming that I assaulted her first and she was defending herself, and in the process of her flailing around, she hits one of the officers. Ken is calling us all Nazi-loving bastards and he's being treated like a Jew, and the officers might as well take them to the gas chamber. Now Ken owns a car shop, and in a small town, word travels like wildfire. Ken and Karen not only got a few charges and a ride in the back seat, but Ken had to close his garage as all his customers stopped going. They also got a ban from our location, and the owner made sure to tell any other business that sold coffee about them. They had to drive over an hour to get anything fast food related. All businesses refused to serve them. Friends and family cut ties. They ended up moving. I bumped into them a few months ago, and I couldn't help but ask, wouldn't it have been easier to just wear the mask? The next one is an entitled parent story. Wow. I can't believe I forgot about this account for nearly a year, but I was watching Reddit videos online and randomly saw my original post, and I realized I had totally forgotten to make an update, so I've come back to give one. There will be police and some mild brawling towards the end. I don't know if that qualifies as a trigger warning, but I just figured I'd mention it. As some know, I previously posted about my parents refusing to give back my Nintendo Switch when one of my siblings stole it. And many commenters had a lot to say about the things my parents were doing. They suggested that I call the police or CPS if my parents ever dumped my youngest siblings off at my door without asking again. Well, I waited and waited, but there was no contact between us for around 3 months since the last time my mom called, and I refused to watch my siblings without being paid. Then it finally hit. My parents called me all of a sudden, wanting me to babysit. And they acted like the prior incident with the Switch never happened. I told them I was not going to babysit unless they paid me, and it had to be a day that I had off work. My schedule had also shifted, so I no longer had Saturdays off. I had actually asked my boss for that since Saturdays were the days they asked me to babysit the most. Plus, picking up an extra shift was better for me financially. My dad got furious as usual and said that I needed to man up and help out. So I pointed out that he needed to stop acting like he had control over me. And technically I was manning up for myself in my own life, like he always claimed he did at my age. Yet he always worked Saturdays and put a ton of his responsibilities on me, so he could duck off as far as I was concerned. He started yelling violently into the phone and my mom took it away from him. I said I could only babysit on Sundays because that's my only day off, and I would only do it if they paid me $30 and included pre-packed lunches, dinners, and snacks for my siblings. Because I wasn't going to waste my money providing food for them. That's not my job. And if they took anything from me, like when my Switch was stolen last time, I would get the police involved to get it back. I saved the receipt when I bought it and documented the serial numbers so I'd have no problem proving to the police it's mine. My mom's bitch mode kicked in and she started swearing like a sailor that just broke a tooth at me. I let her have her rant while pretty much ignoring the phone until she realized I wasn't responding and started demanding I say something. So I said that she and Dad have my conditions. Sundays only, $30 and prepackaged food, or they could duck off. There was a moment of silence on the line, and then my mom went off on me again and said that my younger siblings, who are 14 and 15, had to step up to help because I wasn't helping anymore, and they needed a break. I laughed and said, "Oh, like how you guys gave me breaks, like never." My mom tried to say that was different, and it was because I was the oldest child. I said that it wasn't different. They parentified me, and I lost out on much of my childhood because of it. And now I'm living my own life without them. And they are hypocrites to act like I should step up again when I'm no longer living there, and they have 2 teenagers in the house that can do everything I used to do. My mom shifted into victim mode and started saying that my teenage siblings were rebelling and not listening to them. I said their bitching and moaning wasn't my problem. They needed to figure out alternative childcare. I'm too busy with having a life. My dad got back on the phone and started yelling at me some more. I just laughed at him and said he was just blowing hot air, and that he was talking, but not really saying anything. My mom took the phone back and pleaded with me one more time. I reiterated Sundays only with prepackaged food and $30, and I won't hesitate at all to call the police if any threats are made or any of my stuff gets stolen. I heard my parents start loudly yelling back and forth at each other over what to do, so I said they can just work it out and get back to me later. Then I hung up. It was right back to radio silence for a while. Then one Saturday morning a few weeks later, I was getting ready for work when there was a sudden loud and fast knock at my door. The kind where you know they're doing it with both hands. My mom's done that for years as her knocking trademark to let me know she was there. And she knows I know the sound of it very well. And the knocking was followed by what sounded like someone loudly running down the corridor. I listened through the door and could hear my 2 youngest siblings bickering with each other and tapping on the door themselves. My mother just left them outside the door and ran. But because of all the warnings I got in my last post, I had a simple plan for this. I just opened my window, climbed out, and simply walked away. My apartment is on the ground level all the way at the end of the building, and I can climb out the window I have there easily by just pulling the screen out. I called one of my neighbors that lives a few doors down. She's a sweet old lady that likes kids, and I gave her the rundown. She's known about my situation with my narcissist parents for a while now, and called the police for me to tell them that there were 2 kids left abandoned in the hall after the mother pounded on a door and took off. Suffice to say, the police came and picked up my siblings. My parents called me later and were furious. I pretended to be clueless and asked what they were so mad about. My mom fully admitted she left my 2 youngest siblings at my door for me to babysit and ran. I asked if she'd just left them there without anyone answering the door, because I was already out since I had to work Saturdays. My mom just got really quiet for a few seconds, then yelled, "How the hell was I supposed to know that?" I countered that this was all her fault, and she literally abandoned her kids at my door on the hopes that maybe I was home, on a day I'd already told her several times I worked. Like she was trying to force me to skip a shift by trying to give me no choice but to watch them. She started making excuses, but I told her what she did was inexcusable and immature. She ended up crying, and I just let that go on for a while before asking if she was done yet. She went back into idiot mode and yelled at me that the police were charging her with child abandonment. I said that wasn't really my fault since she left the kids in the hall, then said I would have called the police on her as well if I was home, and she refused to come back for the kids, because I told them before that I work Saturdays now, so I refused to be trapped into babysitting anymore. The rest of the call was some more pointless bickering on her end and didn't really go anywhere. My mom somehow ended up getting off with just a slap on the wrist and a fine because she somehow convinced the cops that she honestly thought I was home and would babysit, or so my next sibling said when he texted me. I don't know how much the fine was, but the fact she had to pay one should make her think twice about just leaving kids at my door and running off again. My dad wasn't charged as well because he was at work, and he also claimed to be unaware of her intent to leave my siblings at my door. I was told he was actually pissed at my mom for doing that. The pot and kettle situation, this was had me laughing so hard. But I guess I have to give credit to my old man if he'd have never done what my mom did. Either way, that left my mom with a police record. That's a first strike in the eyes of the law, I think. After that, things really boiled over on Thanksgiving. My parents invited me over, and I was fully expecting it to be some kind of trap, and it was. At dinner, my dad just sat at the table smoking a cigarette and acting like he was in charge. He had my mom sit me down and then said enough was enough and he was ending this farce. He told me that I needed to move my ass back home and pay rent to help their mortgage and bills, as well as help parent my siblings because they don't have any time to themselves anymore. And the fine my mom had to pay hit their finances hard. I just said no, plain and simple, and I kept that up no matter how much he tried to order me. He ended up getting so angry that he actually attacked me, and he's not a small man. I thankfully am not either, as I'd been hitting the gym for months and learned some amateur fighting. I had my steel-toed boots on as well, so I gave him a swift kick in the balls when he came at me, then punched him hard enough in the face that he was down on the floor in an instant. He landed with quite a thud and even threw up because of the pain while clutching his goodie bag. Then I told my parents that I had my phone recording in my pocket the whole time, and I could easily prove he attacked me first. My dad told me to get out of his house and never come back, and I obliged, but not before taking a turkey leg off the platter and riding home with it to eat. Since then, only my siblings have called or texted me. They said that I'd walked out like a boss, and there are now running jokes in the house now about Dad's poor balls. I spent Christmas with a friend's family, and I've got a standing invite to come back for other holidays. The next story is titled, Ever since I was a child, my love for Cadillacs burned deep within me. It became a lifelong dream to own one, a dream that persisted even after my first car met its untimely demise. My father, ever the skeptic, insisted that my initial car should be a dilapidated wreck, preparing me for the inevitable mishap. Although I was disappointed, I humbled myself and accepted his wisdom. My father had given me an ultimatum. If I desired a decent car, especially a coveted Cadillac, I had to earn the money myself. He believed that by working hard for it, I would appreciate and care for it more. So, throughout the years, I owned a series of Cadillacs, but the one that truly captured my heart was the 1953 Cadillac Eldorado Special Sport Convertible Coupe. However, finding one in good condition proved to be a challenge, as they were rare and prohibitively expensive. Fast forward 35 years, with retirement looming and substantial savings, my dream finally materialized in the form of a stunning sports convertible. It may not have been the exact model I longed for, but its powerful V8 engine and mesmerizing rumble stole my heart. I cherished the moment spent listening to its intoxicating growl, feeling as if I were sitting next to Sam Elliott immersed in his deep and rugged voice. Unexpectedly, my reclusive neighbor Karen took notice of my newfound pride and joy. Although I had never interacted with her much in the past, she displayed an unusual interest in my car. Intrigued, I gave her a detailed tour, sharing my passion. Little did I know that this encounter would set in motion a series of events that would forever change my perspective on human nature. Days turned into weeks, and Karen's infatuation with my Cadillac grew increasingly apparent. She would stand on her porch, fixated on my driveway activities, or invent excuses to venture into her garden, her eyes filled with jealousy and resentment. Initially, I brushed off her behavior, determined not to let her disrupt my tranquility. However, tensions escalated to the point where my wife contemplated confronting Karen, intending to defend our right to enjoy our property in peace. I advised against it, preferring to avoid further conflict. As Thanksgiving approached, the situation took an alarming turn. Both our families gathered to celebrate, and my beloved Cadillac stood proudly on the driveway, captivating the attention of Karen's relatives. Hours later, during the post-feast drowsiness, an unexpected knock interrupted our lethargy. I opened the door to find Karen standing there, accompanied by a group of children, her eyes filled with puppy-like anticipation. It appeared she sought to emotionally manipulate me, using the innocent faces before her as leverage. With a disarming smile, she asked if she could borrow my Cadillac to take the kids for a drive. Taken aback, I reiterated my stance. Lending my cherished car to a stranger, even for a short ride, was out of the question. However, I extended an alternative offer, willing to take the children for a spin around the block. Karen's reaction was explosive. She berated me, her face turning crimson with anger. It was clear she had lost touch with reality, unable to comprehend the impact her actions had on everyone involved. Storming off with the children, she vowed to make me pay for ruining their day, oblivious to the fact that she was the source of the disturbance. Weeks passed, and Karen's threat seemed to dissipate until that fateful day when fate played its sinister hand. I returned home from a landscaping job to fetch a few bags of topsoil, necessitating me to temporarily move my Cadillac onto the unkempt front lawn. Mindful of the neglect my own garden had suffered, I treaded carefully, the engine's powerful roar filling the air. As I maneuvered the car onto the lawn, an eerie sound of nails scraping against a chalkboard assaulted my ears. Alarmed, I halted and stepped out, only to discover a nail board had shredded the car's underbelly, puncturing the front tires. The hissing sound of escaping air confirmed the extent of the damage. Anguish coursed through me as I realized what had transpired. I was certain Karen was behind this act of malice. Fueled by rage, I grabbed the nail board and stormed toward Karen's house, confronting her with undeniable proof of her vendetta. She stood there wearing a sinister smile, pretending innocence. The realization of her calculated plan only further fueled my fury. Determined to seek justice, I declared my intention to involve the police, and I stormed back to my house to make the call. Unbeknownst to Karen, I didn't possess a video doorbell, but the mere mention of it wiped the smug expression off her face. True panic washed over her as the thought of her misdeeds being recorded sank in. The following day, police officers arrived, and Karen eagerly engaged in conversation with them before I had the chance. My heart raced as I stood on the porch, fear gnawing at me, worrying that somehow I would be unjustly implicated. An agonizing half-hour dragged by until the officers emerged from Karen's house, with her in handcuffs. She was unceremoniously placed in the back of the police car, her reign of terror finally reaching its end. As rumors circulated and news reports unfolded, it became clear that the police had uncovered a cannabis farm in Karen's basement. Shock reverberated through the neighborhood, and I couldn't help but feel an ironic connection to my disgraced neighbor. Both of us harbored green thumbs, although our paths diverged into vastly different realms of horticulture. In the aftermath, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief, freed from Karen's toxic presence. The incident brought the community closer together as we realized the importance of vigilance and supporting one another. As for my cherished Cadillac, it underwent extensive repairs, rising from the ashes of Karen's destructive act. The next one is a pro-revenge story. A little over a year ago, I moved to a smallish town. I found a decent duplex on the outskirts with plenty of room for just myself. When I spoke to the landlord, or landlady, I guessed, she had implied that she'd had quite a few other people look at the place, but that those weren't the sort of people she wanted moving in. It was heavily implied, though never explicitly stated, that she wouldn't allow minorities to move into her duplexes. I really didn't care, as it was none of my business, and as long as I could get the place, I was happy. So I moved in a week later, and at first all was well. I worked Tuesday through Saturday, 5 every week, though I frequently got off later than 5. My job consisted of driving a company truck and going to customers' houses to fix their issues. I sometimes dealt with as many as 10 different people a day. At the end of the day, the only thing I usually wanted to do was go home and veg out in front of my computer. The last thing I wanted was to interact with other people or have to deal with a bunch of noise. Unfortunately, my neighbor was running her own daycare next door, watching as many as 10 or 12 kids in her little 1,000 square foot unit. She would allow these kids to run wild. My typical Monday, which was one of my weekend days, would consist of waking up at about 7 a.m. to the sounds of kids banging on walls and jumping on furniture, and hearing my neighbor scream at the tops of her lungs. This would go on all day until about 7 p.m., with no respite. Now, I knew when I moved in that she ran her own small daycare, but I didn't think it would be a problem. After all, I used to watch kids as well, only I was good at it, and I made sure the kids I watched were well behaved. Naturally, I assumed that someone running their own daycare would have the skill to control the kids. Not so. After a few weeks of this, I ended up losing my patience. I knocked on my neighbor's door and engaged her in small talk. I didn't want to immediately tell her to shut the duck up, so I just made it seem like a friendly chat. During the small talk, I realized that this woman was nuts. This was the first time we'd ever talked, and within just a few minutes she was telling me that she had an STD. I quickly forgot her name, but I always referred to her by the nickname I gave her, Crotchrot. Well, after a few minutes of conversation with Crotchrot, I decided to broach the subject of excessive noise. I started out by asking her if I was noisy and assured her that if I ever became noisy, she could ask, and I would quiet down. She assured me that she never heard a peep from me. She then asked me if she was noisy, to which I replied that there was an awful lot of noise during the day while she was watching kids. Now, I'm still trying to keep things civil and friendly, but things start going off the rails. She apologizes and tells me that running a daycare is a noisy business. She explains that this is her only source of income and she has no choice in the matter. I ask her if she's able to keep the kids from banging on the walls at the very least, to which she replies that she's one person with 10 kids, and she can't be everywhere at once. At this point, I realize that being Mr. Nice Guy isn't working. This woman is just going to keep making excuses and avoiding the issue, rather than actually trying to do something about it. I suggest that she either hire some help or take some lessons to learn how to better deal with young children. She suggests I move somewhere else and calls me stupid for moving in when I knew the next door unit was a daycare. Well, at this point I'm just pissed. This woman does a terrible job of running a daycare and handling children, and she has the nerve to call me stupid? I decide to go to war. Before going back into my own unit, I make one more statement. Do you have a license to run a daycare? It turns out that Crotch Rot is good friends with the landlady, and at the beginning of the next month when the landlady comes to collect rent, she serves me an eviction notice, giving me 30 days to leave. Her explanation is that I'm causing tensions among the other tenants and being a troublemaker. Keep in mind, the only other tenant I've spoken to has been Crotch Rot. Well, neither of these women knows who they're ducking with. I'm the last person to just roll over and take it in the ass, especially when I feel that something unjust has been done. I do my research and learn about my state's child care laws. I discover that there is a limit to how many children an unlicensed facility can care for, which is also based on the number of caregivers. I also learn that there are certain requirements, such as state workers inspecting the facilities and conducting background checks on the caregivers. All of that licensing information is public domain, so I do a search and sure enough, my neighbor is unlicensed and illegally watching children. After that, I do some research on housing equality laws in my state. Turns out it's illegal for anyone, even a private owner, to discriminate against potential tenants based on race, sex, religion, etc. First things first, I call up the Department of Child Protective Services and report my neighbor. I explain that she's unlicensed, that she's clearly unable to handle the children she's watching, and that I frequently hear banging and yelling coming from her unit, which has me concerned for the safety and well-being of the children. A bit of an exaggeration there, but I figured I should spice it up a bit. To my surprise, it only takes about an hour before 2 CPS agents and a couple of police officers pull up in front of the duplex. They force Crotch Rot to call each of the parents to come pick up their children, then explain to the parents that if something were to happen to their children, they could be held liable for leaving their children with someone who isn't equipped to handle them. Crotch Rot ends up getting slapped with a hefty fine and an order to appear in court. For the first time since I moved into that duplex, I was happy for the thin walls. I just sat there drinking a few beers and listening to all the chaos. It went on for hours. I slept like a baby that night. So Phase 1 of Operation Duplex Destruction was complete. Crotch Rot was ruined. I had destroyed her only source of income permanently, caused her financial distress in the form of a fine, and got her in trouble with the law. It was time to proceed to Phase 2. By now, most of my stuff was packed, and I had found a new place to live a few miles down the street. A couple of weeks after moving to my new place, I invited a few of my coworkers over to have a few beers, though I had ulterior motives. It just so happened that I invited 2 black coworkers and 1 white coworker. After we had a couple of beers, I explained the real reason I wanted to get together. I had been working on a plan to get back at the racist landlady, and I was ready to put the plan into action. Fortunately, being such a likable guy and on great terms with all my coworkers, they were more than happy to go along. I went ahead and had one of my black coworkers call up the landlady and inquire about her for rent listing and set up a time to meet her and check the place out. I instructed my other black coworker to wait a couple of days and do the same, and I instructed my white coworker to wait until the end of the week to do the same. A week and a half came and went. During that time, all 3 of my coworkers had met with the landlady to check out the unit. She told my two black coworkers that she had already found another tenant and sent each of them on their way. But when my white coworker showed up later that week, she told him that she hadn't found anyone to rent yet, but that she'd had some unsavory characters show interest. Well, this was more than enough for me. I got in touch with my state's Commission on Human Relations department. I explained that I had referred a few friends to check the place out, and the owner of the properties was blatantly refusing to rent to minorities. I also called up the NAACP and explained the situation to them. It has now been about 2 months since all of that happened. I checked back with the NAACP this morning to ask for an update on the situation. The racist landlady was slapped with a fine and is currently being sued by the NAACP for tens of thousands of dollars. Operation Duplex destruction is a success. The next one is a petty revenge story. This is my mom's story, but she doesn't use Reddit, so I'll post it on her behalf. Some info about my mom. She's very caring and kind, but not someone you want to mess with. She can and will kick your ass, be it with words or pettiness. She's also severely disabled. Because of this, she always has a designated handicapped parking space when she lives in apartment buildings. This incident happened at her previous apartment. My mom's spot was the second one, so there were 2 other spots on either side of her. It's one she paid for monthly. The parking lot had the 4th and 5th closest spots as the guest handicapped parking. One frequent visitor of her building would constantly take my mom's paid parking spot when the guest spots were readily available. Also worth noting that they never had a disabled parking placard on display to even be allowed to park there. My mom left a polite note on their windshield the first few times it happened, but she quickly realized that it was becoming routine. It happened so often that my mom would be left without her spot for 10 hours at a time. She tried getting it towed, but the companies all insisted my mom would have to pay, and she didn't want to do that. Finally, getting fed up, she parked her car immediately behind the person who was knowingly and routinely taking her paid spot when there was one available just 2 spots over. With her balcony overlooking the parking lot, she got a book and waited. The person came out and was pissed. They tried waiting to see if my mom would come out, but she just watched from the balcony instead. They tried using an empty space beside them to get out, but that didn't work. Finally, they tried to plow through my mom's car, but with dozens of witnesses and reports about the driver illegally parking there, she was forced to pay a hefty fine and the repairs on my mom's car. She was also banned from visiting the apartment building. My mom had been planning to get a new car anyway, so the damage wasn't that big of a deal to her. Don't mess with my mom and her parking spot. The next one is an entitled people story. I've recently discovered that sitting in a chair all day, every day, can have a detrimental effect on your lower body, places like the lower core, hips, and glutes. Happily enough, my gym offers a trainer-led class that targets that area specifically. I also happen to know for a fact that the promotional material for said class exclusively features females in all the pictures. I checked the signups for it, and it's listed as one I can register for. Sometimes there are specific classes for age or gender that just won't appear in my feed. Just to be double sure it would be okay for me to participate, I went to talk to the staff last Friday about it and actually ended up talking to the seemingly nice woman leading the class. Spoiler, she's a little bit of a sadist, but in a good way if you catch my drift. I mentioned my particular problems and complained a little bit about how frustrating it is trying to get stretches done based on what you see in a video. Her response was, and I quote, "Oh goody, a special project. I'll put you up front with me to make sure your form is perfect." I mentioned that the sentiment was terrifying, and she said, and this is a direct quote, "Oh, you have no idea. See you Monday." This statement was punctuated with the gleeful tiny clap some people do. Monday class time rolls around, and I show up. Turns out the class is being held in a yoga room which is heated to around 80 degrees Fahrenheit and kept fairly humid. I'm a few minutes early, and it's just the trainer and a few other girls chatting in small groups, and there's a collective glance and questioning look from everyone but the trainer, who seems downright gleeful now. She's like, "Oh, good, you're here." I talk with her about what the plan is and see exactly how inflexible I am when the EP of this story enters the room. The door swings open and 2 women enter talking to each other. One lays eyes on me and freezes. "What is he doing here?" The trainer explains my dilemma and says it's a one-time thing. I'll be in the front with the trainer, etc. The woman is not having it and keeps complaining, but also enters the room, saying she's not comfortable and really thinks it's better if I leave. At this point, I'm considering drawing a hole on the floor. climbing inside of it and then pulling the hole in after me, Looney Tunes style. The trainer and EP are going back and forth about it, and then another person enters. A startlingly pretty man wearing a purple yoga unitard enters with a big hey and immediately runs over to the different groups, giving air hugs and kisses to a fair portion of the girls present, greeting them by name, including EP. Now, when my anxiety levels spike occasionally, I'll reflexively make a joke to try and cut the tension because it's that or scream. So when the new guy elicited an actual welcome, I just blurted out, "Oh, so that's what discrimination feels like, huh?" The new guy looks at me, winks, then looks at the trainer and goes, "Oh, I like him. Isn't he a cutie?" I replied, "I think I need an adult." And everyone in the room but EP laughs. She just mutters, "Or you could just leave." After that, the trainer asked her to step out as she was becoming a disruption. "But this is supposed to be a safe space," EP declares. The new guy came to the rescue. "Honey, it's supposed to be a safe space for everyone, not just us girls. Look at him. He's a lot more scared of us than we are of him." EP looked around the room, saw she was getting no support, and huffed herself right out of the room. The class itself went on longer than it should have. It was only supposed to be an hour, and only an hour went by on the clock, but it felt more like at least 3 hours for me. My whole body was in pain. Update, morning after. I knew nothing of pain while writing yesterday. Oh my god. Also, before people call me out for this not being real discrimination or for not knowing what it's like, I realize I'm incredibly privileged to be a straight white male. I don't discriminate, and I'm well aware I have no idea how hurtful it actually is. I was not trying to make light of the concept. I just felt so uncomfortable that I blurted out the first joke that came to mind. The next one is an entitled parent story. We have a not-so-small vegetable garden in the backyard of my family's house. My mom and I are the gardeners, and we grow a bunch of zucchini, snap peas, herbs, broccoli, carrots, tomatoes, and even grapes, with the occasional other vegetables like radishes and bell peppers. One day, I hear something outside my window, which is right above the largest planter box in our garden. I look outside and see 2 kids from the neighborhood picking vegetables from the planter box. I run out and see that both of them have their arms full of zucchini, carrots, and even some tomatoes. I ask them, "What on earth are you doing?" They reply, "We live in the neighborhood." I tell them that those are our vegetables and they can't take them. They simply say, "It's our neighborhood too, we can have them if we want," and they take off before I can stop them, literally vaulting over the small fence that separates our side yard from the neighbors. Different neighbors, not the ones that were stealing. A few days later, I hear something outside my window again, and I look out to see the kid's mom loading a basket with vegetables from the planter. I rush out again and see that she and her kids are loading baskets with everything they can grab. I watch as the mom grabs a handful of the chives I'd been growing and rips them out, roots and all. My mom must have heard me running out because she comes out as well. She yells, asking them what they think they're doing, but the kids just keep picking vegetables, while the mom turns annoyed. "It's everyone's neighborhood and we need the food," she says, still picking from the garden and desecrating my prized chives. My mom tells her that if she had just asked, we would have given them some. Even if it is everyone's neighborhood, it's our garden. The mom huffs and leaves with her kids, and there isn't anything we can do. Our garden is damaged beyond repair. Our zucchini plants are torn to bits, and the peas and tomatoes are trampled and shredded. Our grape bush, which we had for years, is broken at the base where one of them stepped on it. There are no fresh vegetables that year, and my mom can't make her chocolate chip zucchini bread. A few days later, we install a lock on the backyard fence, and the neighbors come banging on our door, mad that we installed a lock, preventing them from getting into our garden. My mom just tells them to go away, and if she sees them in our garden again, she will call the cops. Thankfully, we never see them again, and our garden is happy now. We managed to bring the grapes back to life. A little while ago, we planted some blueberry bushes in our front yard. Someone keeps stealing them, and half of the blueberries are gone each season. We let the kids in the neighborhood eat them, but they only take around 8, 10 each per day on weekends or during the summer. There are 10 bushes in total, with about 100 to 150 blueberries each. I wonder who is taking 500 blueberries every year. We haven't caught them yet, but everyone knows. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.